Sweet. All right. Thanks everybody for joining us tonight for this what we call Lingít 101. Yeah, I'm gonna pass it over to Professor Cooney if you want to go ahead.
Yakayuch Satini, Gunchish Lakat Johan, Yakayiti, Gunchish UAS Alumni Office, Haiti Dishita. Yeo Hatawasaku Lingít Yisaku, Kachat Lakatha, Lingít Anika Hatawasaku, Lingít Hasawasku. Ade Aya Yankakut Hoach, Tawak Shi. Qone aya ha'ani dach ya has kanalhit shidat ihkide. Ohan qo'atliye haqoti. Ganchish ha'inhisati. Thank you everyone for being with us. Thanks to our class for hosting you folks here. This is the night where we are usually doing intermediate Tlingit, so we won't throw you all right into the deep waters. We'll just start on the shallows. I was walking over to class and I heard the songs of the geese, and I started thinking about them and them beginning to fly southward and leave our land, but we're going to stay right here. It's great to share this time with you folks and to share some of the things that we typically work on here. I want to recognize especially Chancellor Emeritus John Pugh. It's nice to see you. And I want to thank Pugh for coming up with some of these ideas that we've been executing now, which is really opening our classroom, trying to make it more publicly available, and trying to make sure that there are options. If people want to learn the language, the money shouldn't be something that stops them from learning. So tonight we're going to take a look at a couple different things. We're going to do a quick overview of Lingít, so we'll tell you about the language, and then we'll tell you just a few things about how many sounds there are. We're not going to teach you all the sounds because that could take a long time. However, I do want to talk about some resources available to help in this growing community of learners and speakers who are learning and using Lingít, which is wonderful. I would estimate there's somewhere between 30 to 40 speakers of Lingít remaining. But at any given time when classes are in session at UAS, there's probably 100 people who are learning. And that's just really amazing. And we're trying to get people to really continue to increase their abilities. And some of the things we're trying to figure out now is how do we create areas of language use and study. So trying to figure that out. And so let's start looking at the Lingít language. So we'll be sharing stuff in here, and some of it's a bit of a review for our students in the class. But when we look at some things like the words of the masters, you can always go back to that well. But for everybody, feel free to ask questions if you've got them. We will have a little pause between this and then moving to conversational phrases. And so we'll also see if there's any feedback, questions, ideas. This image that we're starting with is the cover, the proposed cover of the second edition of the Lingít workbook that people start learning Lingít from. This is based on Beginning Lingít, which was created by Nora Marks Dowenhauer. His Lingít name was Kefni, and Richard Dowenhauer, whose Lingít name was Huaynak. And then their work was based on folks who were working on Lingít before them. Vesta Dominics, Walter Sobola, lots and lots of people trying to make sure that the language is being passed along. So on the back cover, there's a couple of phrases. We're going to start with just taking a look at some phrases from folks that I was very fortunate to work with. Almost all of them, unfortunately, are gone now. So we'll look at some phrases. There might be one speaker remaining from these phrases.
I didn't ask you to do that.
So the first one is here at the top, and it's Dudson. And I'm just going to talk about these first phrases. We're not going to sort of like, we'll reach a point where I'll teach you some phrases. We'll we'll practice saying them a couple times. But this one was Nora talking to a group of us, and she was giving us words of encouragement, which in the context, we had just come from the funeral of her husband. And we're talking about how to finish this big project, and she just started giving us this inspirational speech, and I just thought it was amazing. And it translates to you improve it by using the Lingít language. Really important because we want this to be a language of use. So a lot of what we do in class is we just go over a whole bunch of stuff. Every class that I teach is recorded, so students can watch it again. Folks who couldn't make it here or just want to check out what we're doing could come and see. And one of the things that we're trying to do is create a 0 credit, $0 option. So anyone who wants to just jump on Zoom and learn with us, like there's just an open door. But it's got to be a language of use. So as the student has a responsibility to go out and master the stuff that we worked on and sort of get ready for the next chunk of stuff that we're going to do, because it's a big, complex language, and doing stuff for 4 hours a week is you can't do it. But if you can fill, say, another 16 hours of your week with Lingít, you'll get there. And then another phrase, and we'll look at these a little closer. Well, we'll see pictures of the speakers. Maybe we'll just jump onto that. So one of the speakers is Walter Sobola. And in a very long and wonderful conversation with Wushjihu George Ramos, Walter Sobola is an Kitan, or Tlein, sometimes they call him Tlein, that's his clan. He said, Keshkon akati sawokabuk, ya yaki at yashingitan ka kudzati at ka akakhaswunechi at. The translation of this is, don't you all forget it. This wonderful thing that was born on the world, and on it, it saved them. He would talk about this a lot. This is the language that saved our ancestors. This is a language that will continue to save us. This is Shakshani, Marge Dudson. She was Ishkitan. And I asked her, how do you say, like, fight for your language? She got all fired up. She gave me this really great little clip. And she says, Akach konai shagao hayuch atangi. Kunach akach konai shagao. Heshtasa ayach kuge hayuch atangi. Fight for it, our language. Really fight for it. Nothing measures up to our language. And what I think she meant by that was you can't replace it with anything. There's nothing that can do what our language does. This is Jukatine, Jane Smarch. She was Kokitan from Tlein. Walter Sobola was from Killisnoo and Angoon, and he did a lot of his later work in the Juneau area. Marge Dudson is Ishkitan from Tlein. She grew up in Huna and Klukwan, and then she did a lot of her work in her later years in Juneau as well. Jukatine is from Tlein, and that's where she did the most of her work. She said, "Chuoya, ekahwain hate yashanais at adeha yukatangi hahakosti dag yeji neye." And these were, in essence, perhaps the last words that she said. So there was a group of us that were sending video messages back and forth with her, with some learners in the interior while she was very sick. And she said, it's as if flowers, you all are leading flowers in this direction, the way you are working on our language and our culture. It was just a beautiful, there's tons of metaphor, amazing things to unpack in every one of these phrases. We also used to do a lot of work with Kashkawu, Cyril George. And one time I was doing work with him and Kakwask, Ishmael Hope, and Kakwask asked him, can you tell us what learners of Lingít need to hear to stay inspired and focused? And he gave this wonderful talk. And at the end, he's got these big, strong hands, and he had this watch on and bracelets, and they're kind of hitting the table and had a coffee cup, and so you could hear it kind of scraping around. He said, and that's how he ended that speech, and it was just an incredible moment. And so he says, my prayer will be this: let Lingít exist forever. He was also from Angoon, and then lived his later years primarily in the Juneau area. This is Keuchne, Nora Marks Dowenhauer, a tower of Tlingit knowledge, did so much work with translating Tlingit, documenting the language, recording speakers, creating materials, going to immersion camps. And you improve it by using the Tlingit language. It has to be a language of use. This is Kakshage, Norman James from Tlein, Carcross. We were in Tlein when he said this. He's from Carcross, he's Dakshawidi. Nora's Lukach Adi. She's from the Huna area, but grew up mostly on Douglas Island and then lived there most of her life. And Kakshage is from Carcross. And then he said, he kept saying, I want to record this thing, I want to record this thing. And so, and then I was like, okay, let's do it. And he always kind of back out a little bit. He's like, no, maybe tomorrow, maybe tomorrow. Maybe. And I was kind of running out of time when I was up there doing a language camp. And finally he said, okay, let's go. Just you and me down by this water. So we went down by the Tlein Lake and set up a recorder, a video camera. And he said, this is part of a longer speech. Hast du da at use was talking? Chiklaka da use atkin. Hast du da chanki? Hast du yaak? So always, this was the first thing. They cared for them. They always talked about them. This place that they would reserve for their grandchildren. So the context of this is he kept talking to me all week. He said, you know, in Lingít, you can see way out into the future. I was like, what is he talking? What is he talking about? This is so awesome. And then when he sat down and explained it, he says, all the time, the elders, when he was growing up, were always talking about what are we making. So this ya'ak is a space that you're going to reserve for somebody. So they were always working on this space that they were reserving for their grandchildren. And grandchildren could easily just mean future generations, just like grandparents can easily mean our ancestors. Also, Kingi Si, David Katzig. He is Shungu Kadi. He is from Klukwan and Chilkoot, and he spent most of his life in the Juneau area as well. We recorded a story right here on campus, right over in the office of Colleen James at the Native and Rural Student Center. It's one of the first times I had videotaped an elder telling a story. He had told a story and asked him if he could tell it in Lingít. It's a story of his father's people, of a sea lion who was unexpectedly put into a position of leadership and kept failing, and he almost gave up. But this little ptarmigan, Awa, put rocks into his stomach and said, I'm going to help you, I'm going to make you strong. And so this little bird put all these rocks inside the sea lion. And because of that, he was getting thrown off this rock by a giant wave. So in that story, he says, the way of strength. This is what he says to him. Be of brave heart. Life is always hard. You will not quit. And one of my first language teachers, Nora was, Florence Shakely, Kakashat, she was one of my first teachers. My grandfather, Gushtahin, Sai Dennis, and Shkate, Jesse Johnny, who's Chukan Shah, from Huna, but spent a lot of her later years in Sitka. And I asked her, as you know, what do Tlingit learners need to hear? This is when I first came to UAS in 2011. And she said, "Yiguayachwan, yichilkohascha, yicheitasbuseachkitat." And this is all part of a longer, amazing speech that ended with this kind of came to a close with a chant with these four sort of things. Tlingit peoples, we really like the number 4. And this is, "You all be of brave heart. Your ancestors are really listening to you now." So that's where we'll start, with the words of the masters. Any thoughts or questions before we move on to talk about the Tlingit language? Okay. So Tlingit is part of a large language family. It's called the Na Dene language family. It includes our southern relatives, Navajo and Apache. It includes our Pacific Coast relatives down in southwestern Oregon and northwestern California. Then it includes all of our inland, many, many languages, all of our relatives here. Casca, Shoshone, Koyukon, Gwich'in, Dena'ina, Atna, all related languages. However, and also Eyak, which is probably the most closely related language to Tlingit. But Tlingit has no other language in the world that it could talk to. If we were down to our last speaker, even though these languages are related to Tlingit, they are not, they could not speak to each other. There are a lot of patterns, like if you know Navajo or if you know Gwich'in, you could probably learn Tlingit easier, faster perhaps, than learning, say, Yupik or Tsimshian or Haida, just because it follows the very, very similar patterns. There are 23 languages in Alaska. All of them are endangered. St. Lawrence Island Yupik is probably the safest, followed by Central Yupik and Chupik. Once you get outside of those three, St. Lawrence Island Yupik probably has about 90 to 100% of the people there speak the language. Yupik's probably around 50%. But then if you get outside of those languages, it starts to drop to 10%. And then when you get into most of the interior and most of Southeast Alaska, it's fewer than 1% of the people can speak the language. And it's much lower than that if you consider like all the people who live. Tlingit territory is very large. If this whole thing was a state, it would be about the 25th or so, 27th largest state in the United States of America. So we have peoples here on the coast, and we have peoples in the interior. We're all Tlingit peoples, all Tlingit Ani. We do have dialects in our language. So the dialects are Tanta, which is probably the oldest dialect, the original Tlingit perhaps. And there are no speakers of Tanta remaining. The last ones passed away in the 1980s. Then you have sort of these 3 major branches. You have Southern, Northern, and something in the middle that borrows from both of them. The big difference in dialect is in the vowels. So in Southern Tlingit, there's a lot of vowels that would be an E sound that will change to an A sound. So like you could say, Yan uwani, it's ready. Yan uwane, it's ready. So that's one of the big changes is the vowels. There's also different words for the same types of things. The verbs sometimes conjugate a little differently. And then when you go inland, you get an M sound and then they have held on to one of the other sounds that isn't in the other communities. It's outside of Cluckwa. We teach primarily a northern, we call it the Greater Northern dialect, but we do teach what the differences are, and we encourage all of our students to work with their home communities to speak like their people. If they're from Pich or Cake, we encourage them to speak that dialect. There are not very many southern speakers of Tlingit remaining, maybe 1, maybe 2. The majority of them are in these other places. Was there a question or a thought? If I were to estimate what things look like as far as birth speakers and population, I would probably come up with something like this. There may be 15 to 20,000 Tlingit people, I believe, in the 1900s. All of them spoke Tlingit. It was 100% fluency among Tlingit. Not a whole lot of people learn Tlingit who aren't Tlingit. I know of two folks who were raised by Tlingit families. One's ethnically Haida and one's ethnically Inupiaq, and they were both birth speakers of Tlingit. Prior to, I would say, maybe 20 years ago, there were only maybe 4 or 5 known people who were non-indigenous, who were white people who learned Tlingit. So you think of all the people who have lived on our land over all this past about 130 years especially, and nobody has learned any Tlingit up until about the last 20 years. But we've seen a positive shift, both in terms of the total number of speakers has been rising, and the number of people who live on Tlingit land who are not Tlingit themselves have been coming to learn the language. And both of those are wonderful things. The language itself has about 61 sounds. So if we just sort of go through, and we'll just do them once, but there are videos out there that teach you how to make some of these sounds. Beginning Tlingit is always a wonderful place to come and practice some of these sounds. And we're going to go through the ones that you see in the gold boxes. Those do not exist in English. So when we get to those, it might be a little sneaky sometimes. We also teach as writing system. We do have 61 letters, 1 letter for every sound. So even though this has an underlined K and an apostrophe and a W, we consider that 1 letter. So if you can just get what that sound is, you can learn how to read and write pretty fast in Tlingit. We also have 4 sets of vowels. So here's the A vowels, here's the E vowels, here's the I vowels, and here's the U vowels. Within those 4 sets of vowels, so those are like a type of vowel. So you can have an E vowel, you can have an I, you can have a U. Within those 4, you can have 4 variations. So that same vowel will sometimes be short and low. So it'll sound like eh. And sometimes it'll be short and high. Eh. And sometimes long and low. A. And sometimes long and high. A. So if we just went through, you got eh, a, but all the same vowel. And we say that because sometimes it's going to move around. It was short, but now it's going to be long. It was high, but now it's going to be low. There are also 2 known variations of the U vowel that we see in the interior. So sometimes when you have this sound, which on the coast is oo, and you have any underlined K or G or X, it'll usually switch to an O sound. So like a word box might be kook on the coast and kook in the interior. It's the same word, it's a dialect difference. Let's see. This is the sound that only exists, as far as I know, in Tlein and Cluckwa. It's almost like you make a Y sound through your nose. So if you want to make the sounds, you can feel free to join. I'll just make it once, pause, make the next. We're just going to start here in the top left and go over to the right. So this one, uh, uh, These ones are consonants. We're just going to put this single sound, this vowel right after it. Ch.
Cha. Cha.
Ah. Da.
Da.
Gla.
La.
Za.
Da.
E.
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 A.
E. A,
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 Ga,
Ga,
Gua,
Gua,
Ga,
Gua,
Hua.
Gua.
So teaching Tlingit with the mask on behind plexiglass is like an extra special fun challenge. So if we could just kind of end this COVID thing, it'd be fabulous. We go back to just looking at faces. However, I tell students you got to wash your mask on a regular basis because we make a lot of sounds. A lot of things might be popping out of our mouths, so it's a good thing to wear a mask at these times. A couple of things before we move on is when you see this apostrophe at the end of a consonant, what that signals, and this was never a written language until probably the 1960s is really when it started to become a written language. We're literate now. It's a totally written language. But what this apostrophe means is you're going to make this ch sound. So this sound right here without a vowel is ch. But you use your lungs to make that sound. Ch, ch, ch. Like your lungs are doing stuff. If you hold your breath and make that sound, you end up with ch. So you are not allowed to breathe. You got to hold your breath and make that sound. And that's what the apostrophe signals. It says close the lungs, force that sound out of the mouth. So it comes out very, like this word over here. We see it here at the beginning and the end. So this is a three-letter word. This is a bald eagle. And this word on its own is chalk. 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 But what we end up working with folks on is closing the lungs and opening them. English only really has you do that when you say something like, uh-oh, right? So you close it and it opens. That's how you get that little stop, called a glottal stop, right in the middle. But English doesn't require you to do this and make consonants as well. So a lot of times your body is trying to catch up to what your mind is trying to figure out what's going on. So a lot of times there's this gap right in between this consonant and this vowel. So when we're expecting chalk, for a lot of learners, we hear them say chalk, and there's just that gap because they're trying to figure out how to close and open your lungs quickly while also making a consonant sound. The underline means we're going to this thing that we use to make snoring sounds. We call it nuti. It's the swallower. So this sound on its own, a colleague of mine, Yesh, explained it really well. She said, it's like you're pretending to drink water. Look, 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 look. And that's really the sound that you're making, is qa. Okay, now I'll go back to this one. Qua. Qua. Ha. I. E. E. Ja. Ka. Qua. Ka. Qua. Ka. Qua. Ka. Qua. These ones are they're kind of on the championship level. It's up to this, we call them a back K or a guttural K. And then to put the W on there as well and to have the apostrophe. So this Lingít does not have a voiced L. So the fa la 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 song that people sing, they have a hard time. I have to switch them all to nas. No sha, just na. Because we don't have that L sound. So anytime you see the letter L, it's going to be, you're going to take your tongue, put it right up behind your teeth, as if you're going to make if you're going to talk about a lake, you're going to say lake, lake. But you put your tongue up in that spot. Don't use your vocal cords, but instead relax your cheeks, blow out the sides of your mouth, and you get Sha. Sha. Then to make that sound without using your lungs, you put your tongue there, you end up kind of squishing your tongue up and pushing sound out the sides. And this is one of the harder sounds, I think, to make in Lingít. So Lingít as a language, we're going to fix this word right up here. There, we fixed it. We're not a Tlingit with a K, and we're not a Tlingit with a T. Lingít. The word on its own means a human being or something that is a Lingít thing. Like you say, Lingít yak. And I would think, oh, it's a Lingít canoe, as opposed to just any kind of boat or canoe. So this one is sha, 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 na, sa, sa, sha, ta, ta, sha, ta. So the difference between this L with the apostrophe is it goes, whereas this one goes. So one squishes out the sides and one shoots out the front. Sa. Sa. Oh. Ooh. Ooh. Oh. Oh. Wa. Ha. So here's the X. In Lingít, when you see an X, the sound you're going for is the Alaska Airlines jet airplane. It's going, that scraping sound. Or if you're going to make a noise like the wind, or you're going to imitate the cappuccino machine, espresso maker, you're going to froth the milk, and it goes, all of those are great X's. So all these cappuccino machines, all these espresso machines, the wind, all these jet airplanes, they're all doing their X's just fine. You do not want to go back here and go, that is this sound. This is the snoring imitator. This is the cappuccino espresso machine thing. Ha. Hua. Ha. Ha. Hua. Ha. Ha. Hua. Hua. Ha. Ha. Hua. Hua. So with this one, you're making the snoring sound without breathing. That is another one of, there's like an all-star team. Like I pick 5 of your to be the dream team. I would say is on there, is on there, is on there. And that's 4. I guess, yeah, I don't know if I put that one on. But those are my sort of ones I think folks do have a tricky time. Yeah. Nya. And then this period means you stop. So it's like saying, you can say ha-eh. Ha-eh is like, can't even. It's an exclamation. Any questions on that stuff? We're going to do some phrases now. So I was thinking about what to share with folks, and this is going to be pretty fitting for our intermediate Lingít class as well. We're just going to grind through a bunch of phrases. This class will be recorded, and you can watch it again. We have a website that we put all of our classes on and materials. It's tlingitlanguage.com. We've run a series of MOOCs, these massive open online classes. We've run a whole series of beginning, intermediate, and advanced, trying to just increase accessibility, increase that critical mass of speakers, increase language use, and increase access to our language resources. So a lot of these phrases are based on a book called Lingít, which would mean say it or name it in the Lingít language. Is a mouth, nach is through, so through the mouth of a Lingít or a human being. And then this was by Chechne, Nora Marks, Dowenhauer, and Khoinak, Richard Dowenhauer. Then there's a few additions in here. So we'll probably do each of them a couple times. I'll try and go at a bit of a slower pace than with the sounds. Then when we get to the bottom of the page, I'll see if anybody has any questions. And if we don't, we'll move to the next page. So you can see the English here on the right side. So I won't say it. We'll only work on the Lingít. And when you see that there's, even though there's a question mark here, in English, this is how you ask a question. You turn the tone up at the end. You can also show that you're taking a guess. You might not be sure about something. That's not how you do it in Lingít. It has tone in the language. So you cannot change this to show whether it's a question or not. It's built in by wa and sa, which combine to say this is a how question or statement. So this first one is wasa'iyati. 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 And if you're okay, you're all right. Keshwasachat ute. Keshwasachat ute. Keshwasachat ute. This also works to just say, like, I didn't get hurt. Nothing bad happened to me. If we're all on the beach hanging out and you jumped up on a log that was kind of wet and slippery and then you fell over the other side, you could yell out, and we'd know that you're not hurt. And if something is okay, we took the khat out of it. This is the me part. And if something's okay, you could say, keshwasa. 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 That would also work for if someone really did something that hurt your feelings, made you angry, and then they apologized, and then they did something, if everything was good, once you said keshwasa, you can't go back and say it's not okay now. That just means it's okay. And if you're doing good, you could say khatyak'e. 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 So we see the khat here. This is me as an object pronoun. We pay attention to a lot of these pronouns that we use. To whom is the verb happening and who is doing the verb. We pay a lot of attention to that because we've got to learn which one can we switch and which list do we pick these things from. So you can also be tired. There's been Lingít classes before where I've banished this phrase. I haven't done it to this class, so you guys are doing great. And this is I'm tired. It's okay to be tired. I like to tease my students a lot. I get teased a lot learning Lingít as well. But you can say this because people do get exhausted. And this phrase is khat with the khwat. Khat with the khwat. Khat with the khwat. And as people learn Lingít, sometimes they'll mix up the khat with an ach, and you'll hear like it's a simple matter of just picking the wrong type of pronoun. Or once they go here, they'll go here, and it's that jet airline X, not the X. And to say I'm just me, achataya, achataya, achataya. Any questions about those or thoughts? So this one, we're gonna pick the mom first. So there's a couple things to note here. We teach a lot of fill in the blank phrases. So we see wa, sa, ya, ti, I. And then we look at the English side and we say, oh, we could put a kinship term here. So if I learn how to say auntie, grandparent, son, daughter, nephew, a whole bunch of stuff, now I could put them in here. And when we write one of these terms, so this one, so you see tla, but what this long dash means is there needs to be a noun before it. It has to be somebody's mother. So this is where it's a great place for a possessive pronoun. Achtla, my mother. Itla, your mother. Dutla, their mother. Haatla, our mother. Yitla, y'all's mother. Hastutla, them all's mother. And so that's how these ones work. So we're just going to pick the mother for here. Wasayati itla. Wasayati itla. Now I'll ask about dad. Wasayati ish. Wasayati ish. So sometimes, like if people are starting to learn Lingít, I'll say, see these tone marks? When you're saying them, just like put your hand up or do something, raise your eyebrows, just to get your body to remember, like, this is a tonal language. So if we just looked at the vowels, we got e, I. And then we end up with right? The other thing is look at when it's long and look at when it's short. E, I. I just took the tone out of it, right? But so these are really important because some people will say wasa. It should be wasa. Just get a little bit, keep them long, keep them short. You'll run into some you'll learn later, like this one. You could say wasayati itla. And you could also say wasayati itla. You could say it either way, or e. But we'll write it short. Okay, so that's how you ask how someone's relative is doing. And here's grandparent. Shishk. Shishk. And then Lingít is going to do consonants right in a row. Sometimes you have 3, maybe even 4 of them right in a row. It's not even going to give you any chance to use a vowel. We just love our consonants up here. So then we'll pick the grandparent and say they are good. Ach shishk yak e. Ach shishk yak e. Ach shishk yak e. So a lot of beginning Lingít and intermediate too, but especially beginning is like, here's this phrase, here's this thing where you could fill in the blank. Then you could say like, my hand hurts, my elbow hurts, my back hurts, my knee hurts. You say all of that. Have all the aches and pains. Not that we want anybody to, but then you can talk about it. And you could say they are okay. So we'll say my dad is okay. Heshwasa uti ach ish. Heshwasa uti ach ish. Heshwasa uti ach ish. Any questions about those ones? Good, we get to learn lots then. Again, and so what I'll typically do is, so we'll have a class. They're usually stacked. So we got folks in the room, folks online, even pre-pandemic. That's how we run our classes. Because the reality is there's not a lot of places where you can learn this content right now. We want to make it accessible. But then what I'll do is I'll go home, have dinner, put my kids to bed, relax. Then I'll go and I'll upload the video to YouTube, put a link to that video on clinkitlanguage.com, and put every single handout that we look at on that same page so that students can review it. If a student misses class and go back to it. And if someone says, oh, you guys are doing these phrases, I'd love to learn some of those. Like they can't, anybody can. Okay, here's another set. You want one person to come inside. Here's a trick with this one. You have to be inside to use this phrase. You can't be outside and tell someone to go inside using this phrase. There's a few concepts that are sort of logical concepts in Lingít with the Lingít thought world. If you're outside, you'd say a different phrase than this one. But let's say you're inside, someone knocks on the door, you want them to come in, you say, Neishko,
Neishko.
Neishko,
Neishko.
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 You have more than one, Neishia,
Neishia.
Neishia,
Neishia.
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 Last night in advanced Lingít, a student was having fun with these because we use an exclamation point just to say this is a command. Someone's telling someone to do the thing. But he was using this big uncle voice and he would yell it just to be silly, like all these phrases we were practicing. So he'd yell it out when he said, but it has nothing to do with like volume. It just has to do with this is a command or a prohibitive. It's a do or don't type of thing. You want someone to come here? You say, haku,
Haku.
haku,
Haku.
haku. And I was down in Navajo country, and I saw this grandparent say to their grandkid, haku. And I was like, oh, you guys say haku? We say haku. You're my long lost cousins. It was great. You want multiple people to come over? Hatia, hatia, hatia. Then you want to tie a couple of verbs together. So this first one is yak a, it is good. Hot, well you would say hot iya gut. You came here. But when you put those things together, the second verb goes through some changes. So it's good you came here is yak a hot yi gudi. Yak a hot yi gudi. Yak a hot yi gudi. And then yak a hot yi adi. Yak a hot yi adi. Yak a hot yi adi. So that's if you got more than one person. And so I just noticed something in the chat that I want to check in. So we've got these fancy kind of microphone systems here. So like I got one of these. When I was teaching last year all from home, sometimes I would grab it and try to drink it, but I was like, oh, that's not my cup of coffee. However, there are 4 of them in the room, which typically works for our class. But what I've recently heard is if someone else talks, it switches to that microphone and it takes a little while to switch back. So I don't know if you folks are hearing that. So it's just something for us to pay attention to. Okay, any questions about these ones? Okay. I don't know if anybody said you can't ask questions, but you guys can all ask questions. So here's some more phrases. And you'll notice this pattern, one or more than one. This is the case with motion verbs. So Lingít also has 5 different types of verbs. So the types of verbs that Lingít has, can anybody tell me the 5 types of Lingít verbs? Let's just see where we're at. We'll do a little check-in with students.
A state.
Imperfective, perfective.
Those are modes. Those are modes, yes, and there are verb modes. What's that?
Motion.
Motion. So we got state and motion.
Event.
Event. There's only 2 left. What's that? No, there is transitivity in verbs, yes. But as far as types of verbs, state, what do we say? State, motion, event,
Self.
act or action, and position. Okay, so there are 5 types of Tlingit verbs. A state, for something to be a certain way. An act, for someone to do something, usually to someone. An event, for something to occur. A motion, for something to move. And position, for something to be located somewhere. They all act a little differently. For intermediate Tlingit students, we've only begun to touch on this. Every verb belongs to one of those 5 categories. Every verb has a classifier group, and there are 4 options, and they get pretty complicated. Then every verb also belongs to one of 4 conjugation types. 0, it has some goal associated with it. Nah, it doesn't have a goal, it's just kind of an ongoing thing. Ga, it's an upward thing. And here we have qa, a downward thing. So as students of Tlingit learn new verbs, they learn how to internalize all of this stuff while also just saying, hey, let's just learn a bunch of phrases and a bunch of names for things. And then we'll sneak the grammar in all the time. So telling one person to sit down, qanu, qanu, qanu. Every dog on Tlingit Ani should know this one. They just should. Teach your dog qanu. One time someone said, how do you tell your dog to sit? I said, qanu. So they said, qanu. Then my dog looked at me like, do I gotta sit down? I was like, and I sat down. It's nice. More than one, so if you got a bunch of dogs, or if you're just telling more than one person, doesn't matter. Qayqih. 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 And where's the chair? Gusukayaqajit. 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 Yadu kayaqajit. Yadu kayaqajit. Waydu kayaqajit. Waydu kayaqajit. And this phrase, it does mean thank you, but it also comes from a verb. And I think a long time ago, it meant something like, without you, it wouldn't be possible. But we just translated as thank you right now. And to say it, we say, Gunashchish. 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 And because I think this is a really important word, we're going to take a closer look at this one. Most of the errors when people say this word come right there with this unvoiced L. Back to that L sound, it goes shh, shh, blowing air out the sides of your mouth. That's really what you're doing. So this first sound is G. Nash. Sheesh. G. Nash. Sheesh. So there was some language movements around the world where they said folks aren't speaking our language. We want folks to speak our language, ourselves, people around us. There's been wonderful movements in Hawaii, Aotearoa, which is also sometimes called New Zealand, among the Anishinaabe, the Ojibwe, Mohawk. But one of the things that I heard of that came out of Aotearoa was they said, let's pick like 100 words that we want to replace the English word with our indigenous language, the Maori word for it. This would be an excellent candidate to just full on replace saying thank you on Lingít Ani. People could say this. They could say goodness cheesh, and you could put emphasis in it. You could put kindness in it. You could put emotion in it. There's all these things that you could put in there. And I think this is something that we can do. Any thoughts on any of these ones?
Tlein.
Ah,
The cheesh is just the first word.
yeah, away. Yeah, away. We 99 more to go.
Another one that I always hear for dogs and for kids, I guess, too, are not a thing.
Yeah.
I'm like, my dog, and my mom always says, not a day, and she's talking to like my little brother, my dog will look at us.
Yeah, so nata is go to sleep, nata day is go to sleep right now. Okay. Okay, a little easy question and answer. So then once you learn, as you're learning a bunch of nouns, and in Tlingit, a noun is just the name of something. You're just learning what something's called. What's this thing called? What's that thing called? What's this thing called? And to say like, what is this? You would say, dasaya,
Dasaya.
dasaya,
Dasaya.
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 And we'll pick a rock for this. Okay, so it's another fill in the blank. So in this case, we're gonna put this as rock. Oops. Te'aya,
Te'aya.
te'aya,
Te'aya.
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 Dasawe,
Dasawe.
dasawe,
Dasawe.
te'awe,
Te'awe.
te'awe,
Te'awe.
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 So you see at the end of these two words, and at the end of these two words, you have ya and we. To start thinking about that, there's 4 of these, and they really talk about where something is in relation to whoever is speaking. So ya is right here, we is over there. So if we start with our hands right here, we say ya,
Yeah.
we,
When.
ya,
Yeah. Yeah.
we,
When.
ya,
Yeah.
we.
When.
You can just walk around and just practice that, right? And you really start to get this concept of right here, over there, right here, over there. There's 2 others. There's he, which is kind of here, but not right here. And then yu, which is way over there. These are built into all kinds of things in Tlingit. Tlingit does not have the or so there's no articles in Tlingit. But you could use these. You could say ya te, this rock, we te, that rock. Yeah, we'll get the rock out of there. Chukde te. So then if you had a rock, which I guess I should have kept there, you could say te akya,
Te'akia.
te akya,
Te'akia.
te akwe,
Te'akia.
te akwe.
Te'akia.
So what you've got here is you've got a, ge, we. These 3 things, they combine. So on its own is you're calling attention to something. It's a phrase that's used sometimes in ku'ik, or if you give someone a name and you put money on their forehead and you're to give them the name, if you say, du ani kau danuk, you would say right at the end. This ge turns something into a yes or no question. So that's what the ge, it just says yes or no. Yes or no. And then we have the we, which is over there. Plus ge plus we. Oh, so this one is ya. This is right here. So this gives you akya. And then plus ge plus we gets you akwe. So a lot of times when we're teaching Tlingit, we will pull things apart to say, here's all the pieces in there, and then we put them back together. And it can be a little tricky for folks, but we just want them to see those components so that they can learn how to just sort of, it's like a little accordion. Any questions? Thoughts? Moving right along. Here's an important phrase right at the top. Dana ke ichi wu.
get ichiwu.
Dana ge ichiwu.
Dana get ichiwu.
Dana ge ichiwu.
Dana get ichiwu.
Even though you're asking if someone has money, and who knows what the context is. Maybe I'm coming over to your house to borrow some money. Or maybe we're going to eat and I want to check on you because I'll buy it if you don't have money. But what we have here is another fill in the blank phrase. This is a noun. You could substitute any noun with this one. Yak ge ichiwu. You got a boat? Gao ge ichiwu. Do you have time or do you have a drum? There's some words that have multiple meanings. Ts'ach ge ichiwu. You got a hat? And if you do, ah.
Ah.
There are 4 or 5 ways to say this. Some people say ah. I don't know. Evelyn Hodge taught it to me. She says no tone. Don't put any tone in that. So I don't put any tone in it. But that doesn't mean I think people who use tone are wrong. I think there's multiple ways to say it. Some of them might be influenced by or things like that. But I think it's fine. This one also has 2 ways to say it. So we'll put the other one in here. We can learn it. So to say no, we say clake,
Flake.
clake,
Flake.
clake.
Flake.
Some people say clake,
Flake.
clake.
Flake.
And if something's good, yuck a, yuck a, yuck a. That's another good candidate for, maybe that's number 2, and we got 98 left to go. English replacements. And if something is bad, and this works for like it or a third person. It's good, they are good. So that it works for both of them. We've been transitioning to they because a lot of these pronouns have no gender associated with them. So we're trying to move away from the, in the 70s, they'd write this as he's good. That's how they would just translate it. And then it transitioned to he or she, and that's transitioning to they. So if it's bad, you'd say kesh ushke. Kesh ushke. Kesh ushke. This could also mean evil in the right context, so it is the opposite of good. It does not mean not good. So this klesh in front of the verb, on its own, I would say means not. So if you put it in front of a verb, like we've got yak a, and if we wanted to say not good, we could say klesh uke. Kesh uke. So a verb itself goes through a lot of changes when you put kesh in front of it. You can't just put kesh and say the verb the same way. It has to go through a change. And there's a few verbs that have, you can have is, isn't, is the opposite. So you can have good, not good, bad. You can have strong, not strong, weak. You could have lucky, not lucky, unlucky, smart, not smart, whatever. I guess dumb would be the opposite of that. And so there is a set of them that do have that. And shakudzi, 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 and that means amazing. Any questions or thoughts about those ones? So again, our goal is not to say, okay, now you know all of these phrases by heart, but to introduce them and to move along and say the resources are there. You could practice these again. Once you get the sounds down, you could walk around with this stuff and just drill them all day. So we have 4 hours of people's lives every week. That means we got to cram in quite a bit of stuff because Lingít is a big old humongous universe of thought. And we're trying to get that whole thought world into folks while also just doing fine tuning with their pronunciation and then also just sort of getting folks to talk. If we could just get people to talk, that's probably our biggest mystery. But I think there's a wonderful opportunity for a full-time Tlingit Yuchatangi social coordinator. So someone who has a job, and their job is to create realms to use the language and to study the language. A lot of this could be online, and then eventually have physical spaces as well. Spaces in our community where we can gather, and once we cross that threshold, we just which is let go of any other language and only have Tlingit. I know we've talked about that here at UAS, potentially making a Tlingit Yuchatangi dormitory, where you could have that whole dormitory. Once you go in, it's all Tlingit. And we'd have phrases like this, and we could step outside if we need to clarify something. But those are some thoughts about where we can go from here. So here's some useful phrases. Ishan,
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 Ishan.
Ishan.
I would say everyone on this page can be used in multiple ways. These are like, we call them interjections, where you could say a whole lot with a little tiny space. I would say 90% of the time, Ishan is probably teasing, right? Somebody's like, oh man, I'm tired. Ishan, shake it off, right? You know, so, but it's, if you know people, you can tease each other. Be careful, don't hurt people's feelings. But this is also a very powerful word. So I was reading some stories about other pandemics that we have endured in Southeast Alaska. Some of them, smallpox, influenza, tuberculosis, when those came through, sometimes it annihilated an entire village. So indigenous peoples have a lot of trauma associated with pandemics, which I don't think we talk about enough. So in the village, there's a village called Klukwan, which is sometimes called Klukwan. It's the eternal village. And they say like there was Klukwan in a whole bunch of small villages that you could see going down Jikhatini, the Chilkat River. And these pandemics hit so hard that the smoke started coming out of some of the houses because everybody inside died off. And this whole small village, it was like everybody just thought everybody was gone from that small village. And one day they see smoke coming from one of the houses. So they say, run over there, see if anyone survived. We got to help them out. They say in this house, like everybody had died off except for this mother and her children. And she would not let them see her cry because she wanted to stay strong. Got to stay strong so we don't want to lose hope. Someone opened the door and saw, or came in the doorway and saw the state of things. And they said, Ishan. And she lost it. This is a word of compassion primarily, but it's also used a lot for teasing. It's also used to say, I feel what you're feeling. I am suffering. At the root of it is suffering. But we do use it for teasing quite a bit. As we do this next one. Hatla.
La,
Hatla.
la,
Hatla.
la,
You're from the interior. Hado.
do,
Hado.
do,
Hado.
do.
Same word. So this is, it's too much. I can't even do it. A lot of times in laughter, someone takes the joke too far. Someone, does something, hatla, or if it's just, that's just too much. It's too much for me. Could be in frustration. It could be in laughter. This one, the meaning might vary a little bit from different communities, but at its core, if someone's doing something and you want them to stop, you say, day away,
Stay away,
day away,
stay away,
day away.
stay away.
Don't say that if someone's giving a speech. Like that's, like even if you're trying to be funny, That could end so badly. That would be a cultural violation. But like, especially in a lot of these, when you learn how to use these interjections, a lot of them have to do with kinship. Like there's a whole kinship structure. Grandparents are up at the top. You don't use that phrase with grandma and grandpa. Just be like, well, gotta get out of the village now, homie. But you can use it with people who are below you. And you could sometimes use it with each other too. This one also could work for, let's say someone's just being too hard on themselves. Like for example, they went to their uncle's funeral and they said, I'm gonna speak Lingít at the funeral, and they got too emotional and they forgot stuff. And then afterwards they just felt terrible. I failed. You say, stay away, knock it off. And you're trying to pull them out of this pull them out of a rut. It's another term when it's done. It's all gone. Hooch away. Hooch away. Hooch away. So this could be kind of not, like it could be something that's not that big a deal. It's the last of the milk or whatever the thing is. Last of the orange juice. So I want some. It's all gone. Or, we're all in line grabbing a paper towel. I grabbed the last one. Uchi-ya-ya. And I give it to someone. And I just do whatever. It could also be used sometimes to say, we're done. Hooch away. Like at the end of class, you can say, hooch away. And then just hit that end button on the Zoom call. It could also, you hear dance groups, hooch-ah, hooch-ah. It's done, it's done. They're signaling to the group that the song's going to wrap up. Sometimes on its own, it could mean somebody met their end, right? This guy, and then he ran into this animal and he tried to fight it. Hooch, he's done. If you're tired, exhausted, you could say, hui, hui, hui. For this last one, I always recommend parenting with compassion, teaching with compassion. But every now and then, like let's say you got your kid, they're leaning back in the chair, and you're saying, don't lean back in the chair, you're going to fall. And they lean back in the chair. Don't do that. Then they lean back in the chair. Then they fall over. And then this would be a good time to say this one, which is, that is what you get. But use it carefully. You can't. I've seen kids get their feelings hurt too. Hachkwa.
Hachkwa.
Hachkwa. Hachkwa.
Hachkwa.
From the Lingít language students of today, there's probably a whole series of memes that are like hachkwa memes that are out there. Any questions or thoughts on this set?
Tlein. The sense of hachkwa is natural consequences.
Yeah, right. And so it could be you're telling a story, and like we told them not to do this thing, and then they went out and did this thing. Hachkwa, right? So yeah, you should have known better is also all embedded in these two short syllables. Okay, we might have time for one more. So knowing things and not knowing things. These are good examples of how the verb starts to change. What we start to teach is how do verbs change. If I'm saying I do it, you do it, they do it, we do it, y'all do it, they all do it, people do it. Happens to me, happens to you, happens to them, happens to us, happens to y'all, happens to them all, happens to people, happens to something. All of those things can be built in. Then we can start moving this verb. Lingít does not change its verbs for time. It changes it for event. It's an event-based language. Fun stuff to think about. Because when you say chwasaku, there's a little marker in there which doesn't mark the past tense. But I could say yesterday I knew it, today I know it, and this verb would stay the same. When some people started coming hanging around with Lingít people, started asking about our language, some of them made horrible mistakes and said their language is so simple, doesn't even change for time. They're primitive. And they wrote this stuff down, and sometimes I'm like, I just want to resurrect you and sit you down in advanced Lingít and teach you some things. Then I was like, why would I waste my time with that? But a language doesn't have to see the world the same way. We see that with time, we see that with space, we see that with categories, we see that with verbs. Lingít has one verb that means to remove the guts of a fish. That's all, and you don't use it for anything else. Taking a clam out of its shell? No. Taking the guts out of a moose? No. Taking the guts out of a fish? Only that. So here's, this might be our last set, but we'll see if we got time for one more.
What's the word for getting a fish? Mm.
And so let's do this though. Let's do this. We'll do this set of phrases. I'm going to show you how to find resources so that you can start. If you want to put yourself on this journey, you could really get yourself started learning Lingít on your own. The verb that we use for studying means teaching yourself. For me, that's a very important point. That means no one can teach you. You have to teach yourself. That doesn't mean we're not going to be here helping. But if we're doing 4 hours a week, you should be doing 20. At least, maybe, okay, do 8. If you do more than that, go for it. But if you could just do that every day and continue to fill your gaps and normalize it so that your body is used to making the sounds and your mind is used to making and receiving the language, you're going to put yourself on that path. Okay, here's our last set, and then we'll look at some resources. Oh yeah, so real quick in the chat, if someone says "Gunashish," the quickest response is just to say yes. And it's not like rude, like someone says thank you and you say yes. In English, that sounds kind of weird. Like you're supposed to say you're welcome. And so languages sometimes have these built-in things too. Like when someone sneezes, we say "Gunaksa," which means, doesn't mean bless you, it doesn't mean, it just means which side did it come out of? Where did it come out of? Because the left nostril is lucky. But I don't sneeze through my nose because I have a fear of things coming out of my nose when I sneeze. So I sneeze through my mouth. I guess I'm not lucky. First one, Yisukuga. 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 Khwasaku. 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 Kesh khwasaku. Kesh khwasaku. Kesh khwasaku. Ausakuga. 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 Ausaku. Ausaku. Kesh awasku. Kesh awasku. Kesh awasku. So you see that verb is changing. Yisaku, chwasaku, kesh chwasaku, ausaku, ausaku, kesh awasku. So this vowel at the end, long and high, short and high, long and high, short and high. Also this right here, every verb has a classifier. Si, sa, si. This one is also sa, but that letter A gets knocked out of there. So the language experiences a lot of contraction. Whole bunch of stuff put together. It's gonna start to smush together in certain ways. So this is the site where I house all the Lingít work that I do. Everything that I do in the language. Basically, there's a Google folder, then there's a YouTube channel, and then this is the blog that points towards those things. So if you want resources for Lingít, you click on resources, Just getting started, beginning materials. Here's the workbook that we use. Here's a new dictionary I've been working on. Here's the Lingít verb dictionary. And so you go on and just download all this stuff. Keep it on, you have it on your computer, on your phone, tablet if you've got one, phone if you've got a smartphone, because then you got all the answers at your fingertips. You see something out in the world, you see a marmot up on top of the mountains. Oh, what's that thing called? You look it right up and you got it. And then the thing with all these animals that are from this place, Qawqan, S'ah, Tawaq, they've been here for a long time. Ever since there's been mammoths walking around, we've been calling them by the same names. You can also call these animals by those names and help root yourself to a place and also help the language of this place at the same time. So we'll take a look at one of these resources, and it's the Lingít verb dictionary. This used to have, it has a yellow cover. The cover looks like this. This was bought at the UAS bookstore as a relic. And all of this stuff is scanned now. So it's scanned so you can look this stuff up. There's a table of contents on here. It probably looks pretty small on your screen, but you can go through some of this stuff. And I think it's under clean. So we go to C, we'll go down to CL. Sorry if the scrolling makes you dizzy. So here's, where is it? Remove? Oh, I bet it's under remove. Hold on. So here's Kayajesh, Yaut, Keshaut, Khetlesh. So this is Khetlesh Ak. That's how I learned it. Wechat Nashkesh Ak. And so then we see removing, this would be removing something like the clam from a clam shell. Kashenukak, or the shells from a gumboot. That probably works better as you're taking the shell off. That'll probably work for a shrimp as well. Shikayak would be removing the clam meat, the meat out of the clam. But these are great resources. So there's this, there's other dictionaries, there's workbooks, there's a whole set of things that we utilize to take people from not knowing Lingít to knowing Lingít. And we got folks at a bunch of different stages, and we're trying to really build a language use community. Because if we're down to maybe 30, 40 people who can speak this language, that means we need to physically and through the internet connect with each other, create these places where we can study. Because if you're learning some concept in Lingít, the best way to learn it is to explain it to someone else. So what I like to tell people, I say, it's like the zombie apocalypse and you got the cure. So you got to go give the antidote to as many people as you can. Because if you start teaching someone, then you encourage them to start teaching someone, it just spreads out like a wonderful bed of flowers all across a landscape, and you could be part of that. And we invite people in, we open the doors to the classroom. In the chat, someone asked if there's any favorite metaphors. One of them is the sun is called qaqan, which means the thing that burns, it's burning. A beam of light is called khus, which means a foot or a leg. So if you say it was a little bit foggy and there are these two trees and you had morning sun that has that real nice light angle and you could just see a beam of light going through the fog, you call that qaqan khus, the foot of the sun. If you look out on the horizon and you see the sun pushing through clouds and a beam of light that comes down and touches the earth, that's called qaqan khusi. below the foot of the sun. If you've got a patch of sunlight, like that comes in your house and the dog or the cat likes to just lay in there, or maybe you, it's fun stuff, nice and warm. Qakan khus ite, the footprint of the sun. One step further, long time ago, tlachonach yakutzage shingit ketli, kleshi detikate yach, shingit yachaya yahaskutzage. So a long time ago, the dogs that Tlingit people had were really smart. They're not like today's dogs. They were smart like people. And they would, sometimes you'd have to go find a bear. And there's one time a woman said something to offend the bears. She called a bad name. It's a basket butt. I won't teach you how to say it today. But if you come learn Tlingit, I'll teach you how to say it. But don't say it to a bear ever. You can't say mean things to animals. You can't laugh at them. You can't yell at them. You gotta be real careful, especially wild animals. Don't do anything. Don't make fun of them. Don't point at them. But she did. She got mad because she stepped on some bear poop and she spilled her berry basket. So the bear came and took her. Looked like a person to her, took her. So they had to go find her. One of her brothers had this dog and it could spot the bear's den. It was really good at it. But when it looked at the bear's den, so when the dog looked into the bear's den, its vision would shine in like sunbeams. And the bear could see it and would jump up quickly and break them. And when things break, Tlingit loves categories. This type of thing, that type of thing, this type of thing. And when it would break the sunbeams, it broke them like a rope. That's the type of breaking you use for that. Just like Raven when he broke daylight on the people. So all those things are tied together. It's like a metaphor and a metaphor and a metaphor. And the language gets really fun like that. But we really encourage people to have fun, be fascinated, but make sure it's a language of use and not just something that you're casually studying. Thanks for being here, folks. We go till 7:30, so if you want to hang out with us, you're free to hang out with us. But I know you guys, I think the thing said till 7.
Yeah, it's set to 7, yeah.
So you can be released, but you can also hang out with us. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks for coming to see what we do. Thanks to the Alumni Association for checking us out. And if you want to know more, reach out. We'd be happy to teach more people Lingít. That's our goal.
I'm going to put a couple links in the chat if it's okay. The first one is to the UAS Alumni Association page if you want to learn more about memberships. They help to fund some events like this, and there's also a couple of links to the talks given by other UAS experts. There's a great one about whale research that was given recently by Dr. Heidi Pearson. And also maybe of interest to people here, on November 9th and 10th, we're going to be holding a large fundraising event. And we're featuring a couple of Native Studies Fund that support Native languages work at UAS. I'm going to put a link in the chat to that as well. That won't be until November 9th and 10th. It's a short-term crowdfunding event, but maybe something to be of interest that you can share with your friends during that time.
Okay.
Thanks for being here. This is wonderful.
Yay, gonna cheese.
Nay,
Oh.
Monday, to Wasigu.
Oh, yeah, away. Cajun win, it's Cajun win. 5-minute break for those who are sticking around.
Cheese.
Hey. So we were talking a little bit over the break about kind of sometimes you need a snappy comeback for certain things. So if you're speaking Tlingit and someone would say, why are you speaking Tlingit? You could say, well, there's a couple different answers I would probably say. I'd say, Tlingit dani ka awe uhan. We're on Tlingit land. And you could say, Wanach saya teshi tuwa ushku. Why wouldn't you want it? And I would also probably say, I would probably say something like, a lazy person's going to starve in the winter. So you could take it, if it really starts to get real, you could say some things. So like how to argue and how to have disagreements, I think are important. Not that we want to do that, but if those moments come up, so like day away, hooch away, and then certain ways that you can say some of those things. You could say yisaku ush, if you only knew. Like that's another nice, and that's one, that's a fun phrase. Like when you'd say wasa'yati, if you knew my uncle, Johnny Marks, sometimes it's a yisaku ush, and he'd just laugh really hard. You could, I've heard some other things, these fall under the category of not nice things to say. You could say, maybe you don't know anything. Right? So then, again, be careful. But I heard my uncle, we were talking about some people, and he said, they don't know anything. You could say, a smart person knows the language that's from the place they're from. You say stuff like that. If it gets a really rough spot, you can say nana'i. If you're laughing, then you're saying, it's kind of a FU thing, but it literally means death for you. So it could be pretty serious. Now, a long time ago, they put their thumb between these two fingers, and then they would shake it at someone. Sometimes you'd spit on it, and then you'd shake it. And that is kind of stick it up there, and then you combine that with nana-e, and that's about as hardcore as you could get. And you could go further than that if you're really getting into some fighting languages. Yeah, you could say kesh idat at awe. It's none of your business. That's a good one too. I say that to my kids sometimes too. Like, like let's say two people are having an argument over there, and adults probably do it too, but kids would just kind of stare at people because like it's a fascinating thing. It's like kesh idat at awe, and then they'll know not to look at that. You could say Lingít khainaksa. Say it in Lingít. Shawudanegi has awasku. Keshtasa ayakhuge Lingít. A self-respecting person knows there's nothing that measures up to Lingít. One time I walked into a store in Haines, and this guy saw that we were native, and he was using Lingít in not a nice way. And he was not a Lingít person. But he was saying something to the effect like, where's the Tlingit women, and let's get drunk, or something like that. And so, what did I say? I said something probably not very nice to him. Kesh ishke. Yisikuush wasa kesh ishke yukatangi. Shawadaneg ichasati. So it said, I probably said something worse than that. That's what I can think of now. But I would say, because if he's going to use Lingít in a way that's insulting to me, then I'll use, like in Hawaiian, they said sometimes there's this thing that they do where someone would be like, whatever they say, you kind of throw it back on them with more emphasis, because they'd be like, man, you're dumb. You're dumb. So they would do some of that stuff. And so I'm not trying to encourage that. But another thing that I think of, one time my daughter she was little, and we were in Haines again, and there are these kids that didn't want to play with her. And I was a little worried because sometimes these things happen where they're all white kids and she's not, and then they treat her different. And I didn't know if it was one of those things, or maybe they just know each other, but they were being real rude to her. And so I saw it hurt her feelings, and she came over, and I said, Yadi, shao de neki khasati, chashtakat ka, Chattakatkain aya. Hatugachlaan. Kushtiach gudachsahas. Achoa teshas awas kukoa. Adikutanug ya. Uhan koa. Hashil kohas. Hajitas awati shitsi. Because I was emotional. Hurts her feelings, hurts my feelings. So I said, my child, we are self-respecting people. Everyone we meet, we're going to be kind with them. Doesn't matter what other people do, but not other people know that. And no matter what they do, we're self-respecting people. Because I didn't want her to feel bad because she's so little. Anyways, that's kind of a long chain of thought. Any other questions? I know you folks are working on your midterms, which are next week. Took about 15 minutes. I could show you some stuff. Go back to verbs. Anybody got any questions or thoughts before we do anything else?
One question. How would you say somewhere over the rainbow? Can't find anything that I can formulate and add in. There's things over, but I don't know if we have a phrase that would.
Kitchanakat is rainbow. So kitchanakat kina would be over the rainbow. And just generally, so kitchanakat kina, and then chaguksa would be somewhere else. It was fun. There's Wushchichu Ish was an elder in Yakutat. He came to talk to us. His name is George Ramos. And he visited with us in Lingít. He spoke such really, really good Lingít. It was a bright sunny day. We're on the beach in Yakutat. And he gets on his four-wheeler and starts it up. And I yelled at him, "Siya kwasatin!" He slowly put on his sunglasses and he says, "Chaguksa!" And then he just took off. I was like, that's the coolest exit I've ever seen. And he's like, "Wherever." And then he just took off. Yeah. So chaguksa, where that would be actually wherever, but it could work for somewhere as well, because it's an unknown place. Kitchanakat kina. And you can find that one in the dictionary too, that rainbow. Kina. Just K, high tone I, N-A-A. Like kinakat. It means over.
Like jacket. Yep. Cool.
Exactly. It means over thing. So achkina would be it's above me. Achkina, it's above us. And then you can have any noun in kina, and it's over it. You go kinade, kinadach, kinach, but we'll just say kina. It's a good way.
How would you say I can or can't do a verb? So does each word conjugate differently for that? Or is there a generic way of using that for any verb?
Yeah. Well, we'll look at one. Let's look at the verb for making something. That's a good one. So looking at this resource, we're going to go down to up. Sorry, I had all these things open. Close, close, close. So we're going to go up. Oh no, we're going to go down. What am I talking about? So yech is to build something. Right, so we're just going to use this building verb. So you see a command form. Oh, that's whittling. Sorry. Here's making it. So shayech, that's a command form for make it. In this case, I am. And Lingít does not really have I can, I can ride a bike. I can play soccer. It's really important for kids. They learn these things and they could do it. I can build a boat. We don't have anything like that. You could say it's possible and then tie it to a verb. But whenever I ask elders for that, how do you say I can walk? And they just say, I'm walking. Yan chakat. I was like, oh, okay. So in this case, kashayech is what you'd say here for I am building it. So there, you just go straight to, it depends. So this is an act verb. Only act verbs and state verbs and position verbs have an imperfective. The imperfective means it's happening right now. The motion verb and the event verb do not have an imperfective. So then you have to use it's in the process of happening. But to say I can't, you get down here and it's this one. Kesh ade, then you have the verb, and then you have yeah. So kesh ade and yeah are the bookends of the verb. But the verb itself goes through some changes. There's this little thing called the irialis. It's the U sound. That means the verb is not happening. And it marks for a whole bunch of things. Every future verb is going to have it because the verb isn't happening. It's going to happen, maybe, but it's not happening now, so it's going to get the sound in there. All these negatives. So you see u'yech, that's because that is at the front. Awu'yech, it's because that is combined with that ya. The other thing that has to be here is both the conjugation prefix and this thing we call qa conjugation. So you can have qa, or you can have na, qa, or you're going to have both of those things there. The classifier will be plus I, and then they'll usually have this I at the end. It's a complicated form to say I can't do it. For now, I would recommend looking this one up. But what you have here is kesh ade ye. They cannot build it. This would be kesh ade ye. I can't do it. So this would change to kha, underline K-A. Another example would be sleep. So if we look at sleep, we have ta. So not today. Go to sleep right now. Ta. They are sleeping. Khata. I am sleeping. Ita. You are sleeping. But here we see that pop up. Kesh uta. Not sleeping. Kechwata. I am not sleeping. Kesh ade ungata yeh. So it gets very long. Not only the kesh ade and the yeh, but the verb itself. It goes from ta to ungata yi. It's a complicated form to put together. For now, I'd say look it up. If you don't see it, you can send it to me and I can help you put it together. But this one, this would change to an underline K. I can't sleep. Drank too much coffee during class. Every night. No, I'm just kidding. That's a good question. That is a difficult thing to do. And I want to sort of show you folks a couple things. If you just have yeah at the end of a verb, right? I'm sorry, I'm trying to make it bigger. So yeah, right at the end of a verb. There might be a suffix here. This will follow all of the same rules of that possessive suffix, except for it will always be low. So it's going to be or I or ye or w. That suffix will pop up if the classifier has a vowel in it. It's a little complicated. But if you had something like wu ta yi ye, the place where they slept. So if you only had ye at the end of the verb, it means the place where the verb happened. If you go look in the book of place names, you'll see ye after a whole bunch of stuff. Anach ya andagan ye. That ye means the place where it happened. You can use it, you'll see it pop up in other places, like shtakat yede means all over the place. Okay, If you put ade and ye on either side of the verb without the tlein, that means the way the verb happened. So I could say, kasiye adewugudiye. It was weird the way they were walking. Maybe they were kind of walking just kind of funny. I don't know. Or I could say, that was good the way you spoke, the way the verb happened. But that's why when you put klesh in front of it, you get no way the verb can happen. It cannot happen. I can't walk down. That's what that beaver said when porcupine brought him up into the tree. Good question. Any other thoughts, questions? Yeah, away. Thank you all. The way you showed your faces here. Okay.
Ready?
There was one verb.
Finish cheese.
Sheesh. Oh, but we're not done yet. Hold on. 4 minutes. About to be an early release.
Can I ask you a quick question just about, there was one part of my letter and it was saying, it was talking about like my mom and I tan these sides like together. And there's no perfective that talks about, the we. Well, no, it said like my mom and I, there's none that kind of speaks to that, talking about the it. So I'm trying to like rework it and trying to figure something out for it. It's under smoke, the tan for the verb. And then the one that I got was the akah with Lingi. And so that one's I tanned it. But I didn't know if I should use the I or the she or he one to start off with and then go in and fill in the my mom and I.
Yeah. So let's talk about a couple processes here. So akhta kachat. So that's sitting outside the verb, like to specify, and this could be so akhik kachat, akhish kachat, or you could say achtlain, right? And so there's two ways to do that,
Is what I have. So.
Yeah, that's probably what I'd put, and then I'd say wuchin, and then the verb. That means we did this verb together. Then you're going to move this verb from, it doesn't matter which one you got here. You got first person and third person. What you need is you need the second person plural, which in this case, you would go from a kauchetzek. You could look at this one because it has the A built into it. So because the A is built into the verb, which is marked right here, it means when you see the third person, you're not seeing smoked it. That's just built in there because you see it up here as well. So what you're going to do is right here, you're going to put TU. That's it. That's the process. So the next step is when you look up a verb like this, you say, well, there's first person, third person, but I'm trying to do a second person plural. So I'm going to open up a document that shows you how to do it. And there's other ones that do. However, it's time for us to get to know the Verbal Structure Handbook by James Crippen. This has a ton of stuff in there, mostly in tables. So it's meant to be like a speed guide for learners who are intermediate and advanced, which you folks are. We'll go over a bunch of these parts in more detail, but we're going to jump way ahead. Sorry for the fast scrolling text. We're going way over here to these tables right here. So this is on page 32. It's table 40. And what this shows you, these are perfective suffixes. So the first thing is, what is the classifier doing? If you went back, this was a hle classifier, so we'd go under here. He puts capital C, that means that's a consonant. That could be si, hle, sh, or di. Could be any of those. So then you just fill in the blank with the consonant. So in this case, you would have huashle, wututle, yichle, yichle, wudutle, wushle. But if there's an object, that would switch to outle. But if we went back to this verb, we're going to switch real quick back and forth. This verb has ka built onto it. So that means it's going to affect the way it contracts. But this chart shows us that when we go back to it, capital C, capital V means it doesn't matter which thematic prefix you have. K, ka, ya, sha, doesn't matter. Take that thing and then add it to this. So you're going to have cow, to, sh. So you got to fill in some of those blanks, but what this shows you, there's a pattern here. So for example, if we weren't going to tan, we're going to fight. Ku, tu, sh, gao. We fought. And now we didn't fight with each other. We were probably fighting on the same team against someone else. But this shows you, and we're going to get to this. For now, you can look here, and if you're intimidated by this thing, just take a look. If you don't know how to use it yet, the bridges aren't going to fall down and the buildings won't crumble. It's totally fine. But I will show you how to use this. We'll also walk through how to build a perfective so that when you look at any verb, you will be able to put that in the perfective for any, conjugate it for any person. You will be able to do that. But for now, these charts are here while you start to both memorize and understand the parts of the patterns. This thing came out, I think he made the first one in like 2015 or something. I was blown away. I was like, man, nothing like this ever existed before. Fabulous. You just got this table. And it is complicated because you got these fill in the blank, these, capital C's and stuff. But once you get what's going on there, it does make sense, and you can look stuff up really fast. Because this one, chwagut, or let's use eating. Chwacha, watuwacha, iyacha, yecha, waduwacha, uwacha. And then we could change it to naming something. Chwasa, watuwasa, iyasa, yisa, waduwasa, uwasa. Right? And then the prefix stays the same in those cases. Okay, as you all are finishing your letters, feel free to reach out, ask questions. Don't worry about perfection at all. We're only interested in communication. Next week when we get together, we won't record the class, just share letters. If it feels like we're wrapping up, we'll switch back into class mode whenever we're ready.
Sheesh.
What did you just say?
Finish cheese.
We will see each other.
Oh, that's a nice one.
Yeah, because I said to a speaker one time, well, this group of them, su ye yik kwasatin. I thought I was being so clever because I switched from I to yi. And this one speaker says, you should say ye wushkach tustin. Because next time you see me, I might be dead. I was like, whoa, take it easy. And now but I never forgot it. He was an elder too. I was like, jeez. Okay. Ye woosh gachtustin. So that wooch-in means doing the verb together. The whoosh or wooch means doing the verb to each other. Yeah, so if you left off the "een," you'd be like my mom and I stand each other, right? And we'd be like, whoa, what is this? Easy fix.